Okie dokie, that's us at 10:02. I'm just going to speak a little bit slowly to give everybody a chance just to get into their seats and get their biscuits and stuff, whatever they need to keep them going. So good, right, and I can see that we have restarted the recording as well, and I can see lots of cups of tea and stuff, so that's good. Okay. Great, right, so we are now on to item number 5. So this, so it's Heleth again. Sorry, Heleth, I'm going to invite you to speak to this one. This is the Argyll and Bute IJB opening offer. So I shall hand over to Heleth.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, as we do each year, we present the opening offer to Argyll and Bute IJB. This is based on the baseline funding for NHS Highland and is allocated on an NRAC basis. There are some adjustments made in there for NRAC adjustments, so population, etc. And we've also, as we do normally, set the allocations for assumed allocations as well, and the IGB NRAC share of those in line with the NHS Highland plan that's been submitted. We would normally set the assurance as substantial given the methodology undertaken, and we followed the same methodology, so I'm not suggesting that that should be any lower. However, we felt that moderate assurance is probably more prudent in this case, given the lack of uplift to the allocation and also the expectation for the IJB to break even as well. So just due to the financial pressures and difficulties, we're presenting it as a moderate assurance.
Okay, great. Thank you, Heleth. Graham, perfect. I was going to ask if you wanted to add anything. Graham, I'll bring you in.
Okay, thanks. Just as a reminder, I'm the Vice Chair of the Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership, and the Chair is Councillor Amanda Hampsey. So Amanda and I have had some discussions. We're keen to ensure that the partnership is continuing to work well. But obviously there are some challenging figures and things that we need to meet. So we've had our discussion at the finance. So just a couple of points I would like to have on the record. And Heleth, you can maybe comment on the first one for me, please. My understanding is that the NRAC formula may well be adjusted back up the way next financial year, because it isn't. I think is it the lag to do with the kind of population forecast and so on. It may be a slight adjustment, but I think we're hoping that it will go back the way, so up slightly. But we understand then the formula that NRAC uses, or as much as anyone understands the NRAC formula. I think just to say, we're obviously keen to ensure that there's no disproportionate impact in Argyll and Bute. We do have the big complication about a big chunk of the budget going to Greater Glasgow Health Board for many of the services that are delivered there, over which we have virtually no control, and that's a big chunk for us to have to just kind of keep out of the budget. Like colleagues elsewhere, we were particularly disappointed about the capital stop. Obviously the Cowell one is there, but also within the context that Argyll's share of capital does appear to have been very low in recent years. And we're concerned that just an across the board cut in the way that it was done at Scottish Government level didn't really take into consideration some of these wider issues. And finally, again, the savings that need to be made on how we use agency staff and so on. I think people know this but it is much harder to achieve across a much more dispersed workforce than it is when you have a big the hospitals like even in Oban, where it's perhaps a bit easier to redeploy and reallocate staff and such like. So we're well aware of the challenge that that budget really poses for us in the coming year. But we did want to record that the partnership, we want it to be as transparent as possible. We want to continue to work together, and you have our assurance that we'll be working to try and ensure that we come in again on budget. So sorry about the length of that, but I did want to have some of these things on record for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. No, that's actually really, really helpful what you've added in there, and I think that's given some helpful context. And actually, just although that's not what this paper is about, but just to pick up your point around the SLA with Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and certainly since I've been on the board and when I was chair and vice chair in the IGB, that was something that we were talking about even back then. And I know that it's tricky, not least of all because that contract is held between the health board, so it's us NHS Highland that holds that agreement with Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And I know for a long time there have been conversations about kind of, you know, rebasing it, changing the way it works, and doing all that kind of stuff. And I just actually wonder if at this point, and I don't know whether this would be Pam or Heleth or Fiona, where are we with that? And I know that's more of a national conversation because obviously we're not the only board that uses a service level agreement with another board to access services. But as Graham said, it is a huge chunk of the money that is available to the partnership. And yes, so just wondering if those conversations have progressed at all or changed. Fiona.
Thanks, Sarah. I can probably pick up the part in regard of the recent progress on a direct conversation with Greater Glasgow and Clyde rather than the broader conversation nationally about SLAs as a finance mechanism. So I think I may have updated board before that after some duration of trying, we've managed to establish a formal link with a partner director within NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Melanie McColgan, who's the Clyde Sector Director for Greater Glasgow. And although obviously she has a particular remit around the acute service in Clyde Sector, the arrangement that we've made is that she will be a touch point for us in regard of any type of service issue that relates to the SLA or the historic custom and practice service delivery that exists between Argyll and Bute and Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Those meetings have now been up and running for some months, and already that's starting to bear fruit in terms of creating conversations that have allowed renewed joint planning activity that had stepped down during COVID and hadn't been stepped back up as people had left roles and some of the organisational memory about particular connections or pathways had got lost. So that's already started to improve the flow of information between Greater Glasgow and Argyll and Bute. I suppose what I would reference is that in that conversation, we've been pretty straightforward that the historic conversations between Argyll and Bute and Greater Glasgow and Clyde are very much focused around activity and finance and less around quality and strategic matters. And I think it still remains an outstanding matter to shape exactly how we reframe a formal governance relationship that incorporates consideration of strategic planning and quality issues for the future. But I've received nothing but a warmth in the interest in having that conversation. But what we haven't yet concluded is exactly what the shape and structure of that needs to look like. Argyll and Bute, on behalf of NHS Highland, have taken up a seat at the West Regional Planning Board, which again I think is a very positive step forward. But I think again there remains some ambiguity in the broader arrangements of how NHS Highland corporately engages actively both within a North regional conversation and a West regional conversation. And I think that probably also needs some resolution to really delve more deeply into the historic SLA and how that can be utilised to best effect for services that were in place in 2006, but also to reflect that that's a huge amount of resource investment in 2024 and beyond, where we've really moved on from our 2006 model. So we've made progress, but there's some really quite fundamental and system-wide questions that it draws out that still have further work to do to really be sure that we're using that resource for its full effect in terms of efficiency and quality. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. That's really helpful. And just before I bring Pam in, I suppose I'm also thinking about the conversations and the appetite nationally to refresh the regional approach. And actually, if that that pulls that into the conversation in some ways, and I wonder if it'd be worth us linking that up when we take part in those conversations. I'll bring in Pam and then Heleth.
Yeah, and there had been discussions with the Chief Operating Officer for Scotland about the need to look at all SLAs across the country because they were generated so long ago. The query was whether they were still fit for purpose, but I don't know that that has actually progressed. I'm kind of looking at virtually at Lorraine as to whether anything's come up in the planning arena nationally around that, because that's where that was sitting. And I think we were keen that if they were going to look at that, that we were happy for them to look at that with us, given our our construct and the Argyll and Bute situation.
Thanks, Pam. I don't know, Lorraine, just before I bring Heleth in, Lorraine, if you wanted to return the look with something.
Yeah, there is a national piece of work, actually wider than just the conversation about service level agreements, about remote, rural and island healthcare delivery and the impacts of which SLAs will be a component part of that. So there is a specific piece of work being commissioned on SLAs and how they will work moving forward, because all of the remote, rural, island boards have expressed challenges with what that brings to their populations and how that has changed over the years in terms of looking at more a place-based care model and how that will look as we move into redesign of services. So that is being progressed at the moment, and I guess there's more to come in that space, but I've certainly picked up the Argyll and Bute conversation specifically in a paper I've wrote nationally.
Thank you, Lorraine. And Heleth.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just going to come in on some of Graham's points in a wider sense. So yes, we are hoping the NRAC will be adjusted next financial year, so not 24-25, but the year beyond that. We did push this year for them to revisit it when we saw the population figures, and the population's not gone down to the extent that that the current NRAC calculation assumed, but we couldn't get that moved. So it will be reviewed next year. And there is a group looking at the NRAC formula as well, and whether that's the right methodology or whether it needs updating. And just to give Graham some assurance that we are working with Argyll and Bute IGB as well around some of our value and efficiency work. So where there's work that we can do as a whole health board and look at those efficiencies together rather than duplicating work, then we'll link in where we can. So we're sharing information with each other all the time around that, and also around the choices as well. So we're making sure that Argyll and Bute's voice is heard through our finance plan that was submitted, and that we presented some of those choices forward as well, and the impact of the need to break even. With regards capital, capital is very constrained for everyone, as you'll be aware, for next year. So Richard and the team have put quite a robust process in through the asset management group around how we approve capital spend for next financial year, and Argyll and Bute are represented in that group as well. So hopefully we can be fair and consistent around our limited spend there. And also just to then add in on the Greater Glasgow conversation, we we've raised the SLA issue as well within the finance arena, and I'm constantly raising it as a inequitable funding process now that doesn't really work within Scotland, especially the smaller and more remote boards. So it's being looked at, I think, in all kinds of different arenas, but hopefully the work that Lorraine alluded to will help take that forward.
Thank you, Heleth. So sorry, went slightly off piste there, but I think that was an interesting point. Anne, I'll bring you in next.
I'm going to go even more off piste, so apologies for that, Sarah. But you won't be surprised, no doubt, at that happening from me. Sorry, I just saw an opportunity there in terms of the discussion about some of the wider issues about rural and remote health and care delivery in terms of, you know, various issues, including funding. And I'm aware that there was a paper discussed at the Convention of the Highlands and Islands on some of these issues. And I just wondered if there was any feedback as to how successful we were in making some of the points, for example, about the care home model or any of the others touched on in the paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I don't know, Fiona, do you want to, you presented? Would you like to, and I can give a bit of a top up as well, but Fiona, I'll let you come in on that one.
Well, I'm certainly happy to give an update. I think I'll leave it for others to adjudicate on the success level. I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but myself and Derek did the joint presentation that I think him and Pam had planned to be delivering. So I did that on Pam's behalf, and I think that the Deputy First Minister and her team were very interested in a number of the points that were raised. Nobody had told me just before the meeting that DFM has a history as a home care organiser, so nothing like finding out someone's got professional experience before doing a presentation to them on their own topic. So that was an interesting point to note. But I'd say that the points that were made about the National Care Home contract and the effectiveness of that within a remote and rural context, given the break-even point of homes being a much larger size than the vast majority of homes throughout the Cohigh region, was understood and received. The points that were made about SDS and the utilisation of family members within the options within SDS was also noted down of one of interest. And I also made a point to DFM about the need for the national board within the National Care Service proposals to really add value to the remote and rural experience, to be able to claim itself to be a national board. And I think again that DFM was quite open to that challenge and able to see that the reforms that are being proposed within the NCS really do have to be able to touch every area to really be able to be described as national. So I think on the whole that those points that we made about the delivery of services, the vulnerability and fragility, and again coming back to our issues of depopulation, which I described earlier in relation to Highland, but of course actually the depopulation in Argyll and Bute is of more significance because people are going from Argyll and Bute to other places, whereas in Highland we're seeing that, if you like, internal movement within the local authority boundary. In Argyll and Bute, people are exiting from a working age population and going to completely alternative locations. So I think those points were well made and well understood, and I felt that the Deputy First Minister and her team were really listening well and listening hard to the points we were making. Just one point of feedback I'd give to the board. One of the many case examples were given in the Cohigh paper. One of the ones that particularly caught DFM's attention was the Highland NHS Reserves initiative around the staffing, backup staffing model that's been implemented in Highland for social care staffing specifically. I think it's likely that we'll be asked for more information and more detail about that. That really was a point that was picked up and was gone into her own jotter pad. So I think that's something worth sharing with you today.
Thank you, Fiona, and I'll add as a member of the audience at Co-High, so listening to the presentation and reading the paper, having had nothing to do with the creation of it, I think it was an excellent paper, and the case studies were really helpful. I agree with Fiona's observations. It really felt like the points that Fiona and Derek were drawing out around the remote, rural and island, the particular pressures around that, I feel like those messages really landed. I think what was reassuring in terms of that national context was, you know, given the group of people at Co-High, the things that Fiona and Derek were presenting obviously really resonated with colleagues from other remote, rural and island boards and colleagues in Orkney and Shetland. There were lots of bits that we could connect with, but I think it was also helpful because we could draw out the differences as well. So, you know, not being a health board that's entirely coterminous with the local authority and having the big mainland areas as well. So I think it was a really helpful presentation. It was early in the day as well, which helps. Everybody was fresh and paying attention. So I think it landed really well, and I would agree. I don't have my notes in front of me, but certainly the feedback from Deputy First Minister was one of listening and support, which was really good to hear. Okay, Jerry, I'll bring you in next.
Thank you, Sarah. One slightly tongue-in-cheek comment and one serious question. I do seem to recall in the dim and distant past getting short shrift from NHS Highland for the residents of Orkney who travel to Rigmore for treatment. So SLAs are not all one way. But no, my serious question is really just for Helen. How are we going to approach non-ring-fenced allocations moving forward that may well have an Argyll and Bute factor in there as well? Obviously very clear when it comes down as ring fence and it's broken down by partnership, but I'm actually struggling to think of an example off the top of my head. But if there was a pot of money come down from SG that the spirit that it should be split up, would it be a simple NRAC calculation again?
Great question, Jerry.
Yes. That's methodology we do use. There's the occasional allocation, especially around planned care, where it's based on the flow of patients rather than geography, and that is open to debate and discussion. But the majority of allocations we allocate on an NRAC unless it specifies otherwise.
Okay, thank you. And Emily, I'll bring you in next.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll be really quick because I'm just echoing a point that Graham made, really, as another member of the IJB, and Haletha's kindly addressed it, and it's really encouraging to know that it was raised as part of the budgeting process, but I just wanted to have it noted in the context of really significant financial challenges across the board that the use of NRAC bakes in an additional challenge for the IJB in 24-25 until we see that uplift.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. It's really important to draw that point out. Okay, good. So this is one for our approval, so it's important that we just make sure we all understand what we're doing here. So as Helen had outlined around the assurance, so there's moderate assurance there to reflect so the process is absolutely robust. So it's not around the process, but it is to reflect the challenges that have been outlined. So that's why we are proposing moderate assurance around this. And we as a board are being asked to approve that offer to the Argyll and Bute Integration Joint Board. Are members happy to approve that? Great. Thank you very much. Okay, that takes us on to item number 6. Yes, no, that's right. Tim's got the next couple of items, so I shall invite Tim to speak to this next item, which is our social mitigation strategy update. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And I'd like to welcome, in case of tricky questions that I can't answer, we're joining the meetings Jenny Dryden from Health Improvement and Argyll and Bute, just in case that there's any specific things at the end. So welcome to Jenny. The social mitigation work follows on from the COVID pandemic and the wider effects of COVID pandemic, particularly on things like income, employment, and the interaction between COVID and society as a whole. And board members may remember the idea of building a better boat. So it was said that we're all in the same boat, whereas actually we're not really all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm or all in the same choppy waters, but we've got different boats. And there's the analogy of trying to build a better boat in order to deal with what happens in people's wider lives. The social mitigation strategy and plan came to the board in May 2021, and the aim of it was to start to address in a systematic way the wider society within the board's remit to the wider societal impacts of COVID, but also because there's no hard and fast division, it is also hoping to deal with some of the wider impacts of other changes in society, whether on income, whether on unemployment, or the things that are related to health inequalities, to the extent that the board can address them. I suppose there are two particular elements to run through which are mentioned within the paper. The first one is the more general role of NHS Highland as an anchor institution. That there are many communities, or lots of communities across both Highland and Argyll and Bute, where the NHS is a very significant employer. And there are lots of opportunities, both in terms of changing employment practice or being more open to employment and open to opportunities where citizens can be supported. And another theme of Anchor's work is around procurement and how, in general terms, we can use procurement and the wider work of the board to help local communities. The anchor work has been going on within Highland, as in other boards in Scotland, for some time now, but it's being coalesced within NHS Highland within the new partnership board system. So the work for anchor institution activity will be fed up to the new population health programme board. So we've got a new reporting system for that. The other area within social mitigation is a collection of activities which are outlined within the appendix. For example, we've got financial security, training for money advice, which is becoming increasingly well developed. There's also comment on community link workers, a particularly specific initiative, but I think one that has general implications, and the opportunity within a primary care and community environment for referring people to wider resources that will help them. And one of the most important things is around income support and employment support, which community link workers can refer people through to. And we're seeing expansion within the community link worker service within Highland, which is welcome. And then also set out in the appendix are some other initiatives which are going on, because of the nature of health inequalities and the nature of social mitigation is pretty wide. It's hard to know where to draw the line, and a large number of the board's activities can relate to social mitigation. But I hope that this gives a good review, as I think would be expected in any report of activities that's going on. The request for this report is moderate assurance, not necessarily because of the nature of the work, but given the circumstances, both the board and our financial challenges, and also the circumstances around in communities and all the financial challenges that individuals and families are facing. We can't really give substantial assurance on something like this, but I think it's reasonable to look at moderate assurance for both this specific work and the anchors work that's being undertaken within the board.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, really welcome this update. I've got a couple of questions, but we'll open up and see if anybody else wants to come in. I've got Graham, I'll bring you in.
Sorry, me again. Tim, thanks for this. It's really good to see that we, as a country, recognise this as part of public health, and but we know that employment is one of the key contributors to a decent income and decent lifestyle, albeit that we know now that there are significant inequalities with people who are in employment as well. So it's really around that that I was keen to make a couple of comments. Gareth earlier on mentioned earn as you learn or learn as you earn schemes, which are often particularly important for lower paid entering the workforce. And I suppose I'm wondering how much we practice what we preach in terms of encouraging other organisations to have programmes to help people into the workforce. Are we doing that? Is it are we trying to give the kind of support that's required for people who are maybe furthest from the labour market? So that's my first point, and the other one is that we know that our lowest paid staff are in the care services. We know that some kinds of programmes to help these people move in further up the scale are going to also have an impact. So if we go for these people moving into the National Health Service, we know it's going to put a strain on social care workforce. And then we have the kind of ethical dilemma attached to that, where we know that the NHS is usually a better employer in terms of terms and conditions than private employers or charitable employers can be. So sorry for that mix of things, Tim, but thank you for reminding us of the importance of it in public health.
Thank you, Graham. Tim, do you want to pick that up? And I don't know, Gareth, maybe you want to come in first and then Tim can come in, however you want to do it.
I suppose one way of looking at the points raised that links into the Anchor Institute concept is the Fair Work requirements, or duties. So the NHS complies with them very well due to the workforce policies we have in place already. But some of the work that can be done as an organisation is within our commissioning and ensuring that fair work principles are carried through into our commissioning and strategic commissioning. So that's one element of thinking about how we influence the wider job market. So just one observation I'd make.
Thanks, Gareth. And Tim, did you want to come in?
I don't think I've got a lot. I don't think I've got a lot more specifically to add, but I think in more general terms, I think Graham makes a very important point around how things relate to the whole of communities and getting people into work. It gets back to educational opportunities and the health and well-being of young people in our communities as well. And people have talked about Argyll and Bute and depopulation, so it relates to that, and also a recognition of our situation within the board as it relates to other industries, whether the care industry, of course, for which we have some responsibility as well, but the private care industry and hospitality industry, and how we need to work together so that one sector doesn't destabilise another, but we can actually aim for a bit wider growth. And it is encompassed within the anchors work, but I think overall it is recognising the role of the board as a good corporate citizen, and that includes what Gareth's talked about.
Okay, Thank you, Tim. I've got Jerry and then Anne.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Tim and his colleagues for the update. Really excellent to see it. I just wanted to comment on the expansion of the community link workers, which I think is tremendous that we've been able to do that. And if I could say to Pam Cremin, if we could pick that up for a report into the Health and Social Care Partnership, I think that would be really good to get that good news story out there. Probably relating to the actual paper we've got as well. Do we have anything similar to the welfare and advice partnerships from Argyll and Bute in the North Highland area? I'd be interested to know about that. And I had a specific question in relation to fuel poverty and energy advice. I didn't see anything mentioned specifically in relation to that, but it may well be inherent in the general advice that we're facilitating. And probably my only critical comment would be, and it may well be, and it's apologies if I've just missed it, Tim, I didn't see a lot of mention of the third sector in there and how we're working with the third sector and pulling all this together. But excellent work. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, so thanks. I think the third sector. I think that it's simply an omission from the paper and I think we're contracting a lot with the third sector, as well as the third sector working on its own, doing a huge amount of work in this area. I suppose the paper focuses particularly on board actions, and I think it's probably a little bit remiss just to leave that out. But I think the reason for it will have been that focus, rather than thinking a bit more broadly about who's contracted to do different things. I think on the fuel poverty, I think there are lots of the elements and the services that are outlined will be able to give that advice on fuel poverty, which is clearly important. And I don't know whether Jenny Dryden will be able to come in on your specific questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Thank you. So the welfare advice and health partnerships, yes, there is a similar initiative running in Highland. So it's specifically between Highland Council and the individual GP practices. I don't know off the top of my head how many. It'll be a slightly higher number than for Argyll and Bute, obviously, proportionate to the size. But I can certainly get that information for you if that would be useful. And just to echo Tim's point as well, yes, energy advice and fuel poverty is included in a lot of the information that's distributed. And we also have people from working within those sectors and in third sector partners on some of the multi-agency groups that are running around poverty and income. So, for example, there are the child poverty action groups, which have members of staff from third sector within it. And also within Argyll and Bute, we have a financial inclusion and advice group as well, which is really multidisciplinary. There's lots of partners in there that share information and work together to address these issues. And I'm assuming the similar will happen in Highland as well, although I can only speak for Argyll and Bute on that.
Thank you, that's great. And I suppose particularly, you're absolutely right, Jerry, to raise the fuel poverty issue. And actually, for some of our communities, particularly island communities, fuel availability, never mind poverty, but that's a whole different conversation. Great, okay. I've got Anne coming in next, followed by Joanne. So Anne.
So I had a specific question on the paper, Sarah, but then a slightly wider point I wanted to raise from one of my recent visits. So absolutely, like everybody else, it's great to see this update, Tim, and thanks to the people who've actually been doing the work, because I'm sure you would acknowledge that's largely not yourself. I just wondered if we had managed to submit metrics to the Scottish Government, as is referred to in the paper. They were expected, I think, by the end of last week on the fair work, procurement, disposal of assets, etc. But we've touched on issues to do with employability, and a lot of our efforts around that area in terms of offering work opportunities to people who have been out of the workforce or may face barriers to entering the workforce, I get, are aimed at our social care staff. And recently on a visit to Fort William, and this is entirely anecdotal, so Gareth may not, or others may not feel it's representative in any wider sense, but I was really struck, and it's probably not a very good reflection on me, that I was really struck by the extent to which the thought of undertaking SVQ and other sort of formal qualification assessment seemed to be a substantial barrier for some of our staff who have had to do this through working in social care. So I just wondered, what people's reflection on that was. And I'm sure it probably, well, I don't know, there seemed to be a suggestion that this was much more of an issue for lower grade posts in social care than perhaps it is in the health side of things, but I don't know about that. But it was certainly something that I really hadn't been thinking about, and I just wondered what Gareth or others' reflections were on that feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I can see Gareth's popped his hand up, so I'll bring you in, Gareth.
Thanks. Yeah, I was there with Anne for that visit. I think probably what we need to look at, well, not probably, we are looking at, sorry, is where we are in relation to, as Graham referenced earlier, the range of mechanisms for people to develop while they're working, and SVQ is a well recognised pathway for that, and getting accreditation for different routes. I think the issue that's been raised is the anxiety that can cause individuals that are not particularly academically orientated, or have not had good experience around what they perceive to be maybe onerous. So I think what will come out of this is what support can we put in place, and that was really the conversation we had there around with the staff. Was the difference was made was when the staff were supported to understand how this can work and how they can be supported through the assessment process in a supportive way to allay their fears. So I suppose that's applicable to any of our staff. Just happened to be that context we were speaking to people in, and there's obviously different ways of looking at assessment and how that can be done in a compassionate and supportive way. But this will come back down to probably the organisational level of support we have for supporting people to go through SVQs, and I don't know what that level is at the moment, and that's something I want to work with in terms of establishing an oversight group, looking at employability and understanding where are our strengths, where are our sort of weaknesses, if you like, in terms of where we need to develop. Certainly where I was previously in Golden Jubilee had very, very strong SVQ assessment process for our nursing and clinical education colleagues. We had less so for our corporate type roles, and that's one of the things. It's about SVQ assessor support, and that's both from a perspective of doing the assessment and supporting the pathway, but also within that's the critical part to supporting staff, because you train the assessors to do it well, they can support staff to talk them through what's involved. So it's a bit of both that we need to look at. What's capacity, but also what's the approach.
Thank you, Gareth. Joanne, I'll bring you in next.
Thanks, Sarah. Tim, thank you for the report. It's good to see some of the details coming through. I just had a query under the mental health delivery group around the initial meetings to consider the development of lived experience, and I wondered how involved the third sector were in the initial kind of development and the initial meetings, if you could maybe clarify that for me slightly. And last year at some of the meetings there was talks about recruitment of 100 Highland people to give support and opinions within services within NHS Highland, and I just wondered if that work is linked, and I don't recall hearing too much about how the recruitment's gone for that, and is that linked into when we're looking for lived experience? Are we going back to this pool of people who've already expressed an interest to to help? Thank you.
I can't answer the question. I'd need to get back to you, and I expect it would be Kathy Steer who would be best placed to be able to answer the specific questions on the mental health delivery group. I think the other element of mental health, the lived experience, goes a bit beyond the social mitigation work onto other areas, but I can look into that and get back to you. And also to pick up on Anne's question on the metrics, which was left hanging. The deadline for the metrics is the 29th, and they are ready to be submitted. So they will be submitted to Scottish Government.
Thanks, Tim. Sorry, Anne, I dropped that one. Gareth, you popped your hand up there.
So I believe the initiative is the Highland 100 that Ruth supported. It's before my time of joining the board. I think that's part of the community engagement framework, and I think the challenge around that is the getting it. So I think it's challenges in getting recruitment onto those panels and sustaining the level of engagement and onto the panel as well is my understanding of that. So certainly something was progressed and is good practice in terms of being able to have that as part of your overall engagement. And I suppose that's where you take things like this for comment from a wider perspective. So that's as much as I know at the moment in terms of Highland 100s and how effective it's been.
Okay, thanks. And we can maybe look at that offline and get some more detail for you, Joanne. Anne.
Sorry, yeah, it was just to say that an update on that would have been included in Ruth's last report to the Staff Governance Committee. So, you know, can make that available for Joanne, although I'm afraid I cannot remember the specific detail of where we were at in terms of recruiting up to the 100. Gareth's quite right to say it is the Highland 100 panel that was being referred to there, but I can certainly forward that report to Joanne, and I'm sure Ruth will be able to update even, you know, to the current time. Thanks.
That's great, thank you, Anne. That's really helpful. I had a question which started off about digital, but actually maybe it's a bit more broad. So I was thinking about the section of the report which talks about digital inclusion, but of course we have a lot of areas, particularly our very rural and some island areas, where actually access to digital, no matter how competent you might be, is not there. I'm including my own house in this. This is why I'm asking. But I was wondering, when I kind of broadened that out through this process of kind of capturing our social mitigation actions, and I suppose indeed through our work around the anchor organisation stuff, is what is our ability to feed back up. And I know that we have the opportunity to feed into Scottish Government in lots of different ways and in lots of different forums, but particularly through the social mitigation lens. Do we have the opportunity through our reporting to feed up the way around the things that are external barriers that are preventing us from realising the full benefit of these social mitigation actions? And I'm thinking about, digital availability, but then I'm also thinking about transport, housing, the things that we hear time and time again in our rural and island communities that are significant barriers to our communities and to our workforce. And I don't know, is there a kind of a two-way process when we're talking about social mitigation?
Yeah, I think there isn't a straightforward social mitigation channel up to Scottish Government. I think it could be included within Anchor's work. It could be included within digital work. It could be included in a variety of other ways. Could be fed up through the community planning partnerships and how they feed up, or to through other partner organisations. I think that maybe something particularly on digital that we need to have a look at how we can feed that up, because I can't, others may know of better channels, but I can't think of any particular channel that we would feed up, and clearly it's a significant issue for being able to both access services and also get opportunities for things like education.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Tim. And I think if we are able to capture that through the lens of our geography and why that's a barrier, particularly as we know, digital is a key enabler for us moving forward. Well, it is now, but it will be increasingly so as we move forward. And I think that will be really important to highlight those specific barriers that we experience. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. So just to recap, we are being offered moderate assurance, which Tim outlined for us, and being asked to note the content of the social mitigation strategy update. Are we happy with that? Great, okay. I do apologise, we're a little bit over time, but we'll carry on just now and then we'll get a lunch break after this next item. So this is item number 7. Tim again, this is our corporate parenting and update. It's the key deliverables for 2024. So over to you again, Tim.
Thank you very much. I think this is a little bit more of an update, I think, than key deliverables. I think it hasn't quite got the metrics that it is entitled as it should be, but I think it hasn't quite got the metrics that I would have hoped on it. So I'm sorry that can't do that, but hopefully we can remedy that in due course. Corporate parenting is a vital element of the board's work and public sector work and within society. And I think we need to be conscious of many aspects of poor health that care experienced people have and the need for wider opportunities. It links back to the previous paper on social mitigation and on the role of the board as an anchor, giving opportunities for employment as an example when we come to looking at opportunities for care experienced people. Many board members will remember training that was undertaken with Who Cares Scotland for looking at our corporate parenting role. And what this paper does is update the current position in the context of now having a child health commissioner, Debbie Stewart, is unfortunately unable to join us today, but she's been working for several months now. I think she started just in the early days of January, so she's been working for nearly 3 months, and that's given a relatively vast amount more capacity. Still small amounts of capacity, but a lot more than before she was in post on specific areas like corporate parenting and an implementation of the promise. The paper sets out the current position of the Promise Board in Highland and the Corporate Parenting Board in Argyll and Bute, and how they're working in our role with them. We did have and it's referenced in the report, the draft action plan. A lot of those actions have been overtaken by events. The board in Highland has sort of reformulated itself. Delighted that in a different capacity, Gaynor has joined the Promise Board in Highland, and I think both boards are making progress, but we need to, I think, refocus our work. There are certainly areas of the board's responsibility that are particularly important for care experienced young people. When surveys are done, mental health comes up as being very high on the agenda. We're not particularly thinking about specialised child and adolescent mental health services, but general mental health, general mental well-being. And I think there's a lot more that we can do on that, as well as making sure that we've got best quality CAM services that we can, and also an area I think generally with that's the promise and care experience young people, which I think doesn't get as much attention as perhaps it should, is liaising with primary care and making sure that the people who have the most contact with those who are care experienced will also have the right amount of knowledge and experience, and are able to direct people in the right way. So I think I'll just open it for any comments or questions. As I say, it's not. I think that there's a lot more work to do in terms of the metrics and in terms of saying how we're able to actually demonstrate delivery on actions. So I'd like to return to that later on in the year. But I'm sure with the new focusing of both boards and also with the work of the Child Health Commissioner, we should be able to make more progress, as will be witnessed by further training later on in the year.
Thank you, Tim. And just before I bring Gaynor in, just say really welcome Debbie's appointment, and I had the opportunity to meet with her just shortly after she came into post, so that's really positive for us in taking this forward. I got Gaynor, so I'll bring you in next.
Thank you. Thanks for the paper, Tim. I was just thinking in terms of it's like a bit of a kind of juncture for the board and for Argyll Bute and Highland Council in terms of them currently updating their corporate parenting plans. And I just wondered, as board members, what our involvement would be kind of in that process. And I suppose more broadly in terms of our development as corporate parents, if there are any plans to incorporate that into either future papers that come to the board or to into a development session. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd certainly look to do that, but we haven't got the arrangements there yet, so it's not within the calendar. But I think it's certainly a very important thing that we'll do, and it's certainly on Debbie and my intention to do that, and Louise as well, who has a considerable involvement within the corporate parenting and promise agenda.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Anne, I'll bring you next.
So I know that we probably have quite a lot of context from national studies, but I wondered whether we have a good picture of the health status of care experienced young people in our area, Tim, and if not, what would be the sort of priorities in terms of trying to develop the intelligence that we have that might guide some of our plans? Thanks.
I think it's a tricky question, because I think epidemiologically, I think that probably the answer is no, because of the numbers. I mean, we get various. We might get some up and down, which might look quite dramatic, but actually wouldn't be significant in terms of local statistics. We know nationally, and we can then extrapolate locally, that looked after children and young people tend to have poorer health than children who aren't care experienced. Specifically, I think that I mentioned mental health, and when we ask care experienced children and young people what are their concerns around health issues, then it's mental health that is the one thing that's prominent. And I think that would be true national. Well, it certainly be true that there are mental health issues nationally in terms of the epidemiology. As I said, we can't really judge that locally, but I think certainly we can go along with we should go along with what local children and young people are saying, that's what concerns them, and it's the things like anxiety and depression and things that are affecting society as a whole, and they're becoming more prominent in society as a whole, but are particularly prominent for people who are care experienced. And there is an issue with access as well, which is more general, about moving around, about having access to the same people who are able to give health and care advice. So I think it's probably true that anything that you look at which is a prominent health need for young people will be more prominent within care experienced young people. But I think mental health, maybe moving on to substance use as well, is probably another area, and there's quite an overlap between the two. So that's where I put that. But epidemiologically, I think we could probably do with some more focused work in that area, particularly given some of the prominent mental health issues and substance use issues within society as a whole within Highland. But I think it's probably in the area of more focused work, working with care experienced children and young people and identifying what they think is important.
Thanks, Tim. And Jerry, I'll bring you in next.
Thank you, Sarah. Just a very quick comment, thanking Tim for bringing the paper today and recognising, I think, that the additional work that we as a board need to do. And personally, I would 100% support that. I mean, what strikes me when I was reading the report was, and I'm only speaking from a personal perspective here, I feel quite divorced from the work of the Promise Board and its role, its influence, and I don't know how we're feeding into that, and it may well all be our fault because we're not proactively doing so. So I would certainly 100% support this becoming a far more prominent item on our agenda, whether that's a formal board meeting or through a development session or a combination of both. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, Jerry. You read my mind. I was just, while the conversation was developing, I was thinking about that. And you're right, because we have obviously our duties as a corporate parent, but also our duty to be part of delivering the promise. And how do we make sure that we are, as you said, not divorced from that? So I think probably Tim and I can maybe talk about this offline, but I think it would be great to bring this back to the board with more detail, and perhaps that's both. Maybe it's a development session and something to the board in due course as well. I think that would be welcomed. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up, no other comments or questions. So just to recap, oops, scrolling the wrong way. We are being offered moderate assurance around that report and then asked to note the content. Are members happy with that? Okay, super. Right, we have earned a lunch break. Half an hour plus 2 minutes. See you back here at 1:25.